Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Kevin Bulkicki YouTube channel. And the South Carolina Gamecock women's basketball team is headed back to the Final Four for the sixth straight year and the eighth time in program history after knocking off the 3 seed TCU Horned Frogs by a score of 78-52. What a turnaround in this game, because this game was not going South Carolina's way early on. You have to give a huge shout out to TCU. They came out firing on all cylinders. They started off on a 12-4 run. It looked like TCU did not come to play, and then they ended up not showing up after that. South Carolina absolutely put the hammer down and clamped up Olivia Miles and this TCU team, holding Olivia to just 18 points and 6 of 20 from the field. You take that every step of the way, every game. You take that kind of performance from Olivia Miles. You knew that if TCU was going to win, that she would have to have a monster game and put the team on her back, and she just wasn't able to do that against this South Carolina defense. And how can I talk about this South Carolina team? First off, we have to talk about Dawn Staley. Dawn Staley has done miracles on me. She has done miracles for this program. This program is not where it is today without Dawn Staley. This team has been to the Final Four 8 times, and Dawn Staley has led them there every single time. She has completely revamped this team into being a perennial contender year in and year out. So we tip our hats to Dawn Staley, and we thank her so much for providing us with such entertaining basketball. But if we're going to talk about this game, we have to talk about Agot McKeer. She's been having a really good tournament. She made the all-regional team for Regional 4 in Sacramento. Raven Johnson ended up being the regional most outstanding player. And Agot McKeer has been coming off the bench, and she doesn't complain about coming off the bench. She just gets off the bench and starts scoring. She had a career high 18 points. She had a career high earlier in this tournament of 16 points. She is just a freshman, and we've seen a number of freshmen go off at South Carolina. Joyce Edwards, popped off in the tournament. You also had Tournament Tessa being born in her freshman year. So freshmen's stepping up and playing really well in this tournament is nothing new. And Agot McKeer, at points in the game, looked like the best player on the court for either team. And of course, we have to give a huge shout out to Joyce Edwards. Another fantastic game, 22 points and 12 rebounds. She was everywhere. And TCU has locked down the paint a lot, and much like Oklahoma did in the last game. But Joyce Edwards was still able to get her points and still rack up over 20. Now, the thing about this South Carolina team is that you can have a player go off one game and then they won't show up at all in the next game, and it doesn't matter because they have a next woman up mentality. And that's exactly what happened with Tanaya Latson. Tanaya Latson didn't have her most points scored in a game. That was earlier in December against NC Central when she scored 32 points. But that was her statement game against Oklahoma, scoring 28 points and going 10 for 10 from the line. And in this game, she had only 3 points, and that's all that they needed from her tonight. And also Tessa Johnson. Tessa Johnson got shut out in the first 3 quarters of this ball game, and she ended up with 11 points and going 3 for 3 from 3. Now, I mentioned in my previous recap in the Sweet 16 against Oklahoma that I didn't think that 71% was going to be a a 3-point field goal percentage that was sustainable for this team, and I was partially right and partially wrong. Obviously, they didn't get to 71%, but they still shot 64% from 3 in this game, and that, they weren't, like, shooting them left and right, but when they picked their spots, they made their shots, and that rhymes. I'm a poet, and I didn't even know it. But Tessa Johnson really came alive in that 4th quarter, and this was a game that was relatively tight throughout the course of the game, but in that 4th quarter, South Carolina just absolutely ran away with it, outscoring TCU 29-11. TCU didn't score their first point of the 4th quarter until 4 minutes into the game into the quarter, and by then it was wraps. The game was over at that point. But you do have to give a lot of credit to TCU. They've never made it this far, and they played a really good game, and they punched South Carolina in the mouth early on, and now they set themselves up for a matchup against UConn in the Final Four. If they play the way that they played early on uh, against this team, TCU, and the way that they played in the SEC championship game against Texas, and they struggle early on, this game's gonna get ugly like it did last year. I don't really have a whole lot of faith in this South Carolina team beating this UConn team. However, the last couple games, UConn's been pretty beatable. North Carolina went toe to toe with them, and they hung around for a little bit, and so did their matchup in the Elite Eight. These last two games, they they've been struggling a little bit. They eventually pulled away, but South Carolina obviously is the best team that UConn would have faced all season, and the teams that were able to kind of get some punches in against UConn. Obviously, South Carolina is going to be a lot better than those teams. The key for South Carolina in this game is how quickly they start. If they get out to like a 12-2 run and really, kick UConn in the mouth, then they have a really good shot at winning that game. Obviously UConn's going to battle back and going to make it a tight game. But on the flip side, if South Carolina looks up and it's like 15 nothing all of a sudden, it's going to get ugly, and I don't think that South Carolina is good enough to play catch up with UConn. Now, I guess it's good that South Carolina played this way against TCU because they actually trailed for the first time in this tournament. And I think that's a good thing. I think that you shouldn't be trailing for the first time in the tournament in the Final Four. That's not good. You want to be battle tested. You want to know what adversity is like. And I think it definitely helps that you lose games before that, so what it takes for a team to beat you, and allows you the opportunity to be like, all right, that's the blueprint for beating us. We got to make sure that we don't allow them to do that. Obviously, South Carolina does have an, undefeated national championship season under their belt that they did in 2024. But, it doesn't hurt to lose a game or two. So, UConn is 2 wins away from another perfect season. I think that, coming into the Sweet 16, obviously, into this tournament, it was UConn versus the field, and I still think it's UConn versus the field. But I think that Texas is really making a push as being right up there with UConn. Texas has the largest margin of victory thus far in the NCAA tournament for any SEC team in this tournament's history. And Rory Harmon and Madison Booker are playing great, and Texas looks really dominant. They went into a game against Michigan, who's a very good team, and they left no doubt. They absolutely wiped the floor with them. So the four teams that are in the Final Four are all one seeds. You have the top seed UConn, the second one seed UCLA, the third one seed Texas, and the fourth one seed South Carolina. So it's going to be UConn and South Carolina, and then UCLA and Texas. And Texas is the only team to beat UCLA this year. And Texas right now is playing like the best team in the tournament. UConn has struggled their last couple games. Texas has not. Texas has been fantastic. And this is the first time since 1996 where all four teams are in the Final Four for the second year in a row. And I think this is great. It definitely sets up for some early blowouts in the earlier rounds of the tournament. But when we get to the later stages, unfortunately, a 1 versus 2 seed, Michigan and Texas was a blowout. A 1 versus a 3 seed, TCU and South Carolina ended up being a blowout. UCLA ended up blowing out their team, and UConn, eventually ended up blowing out their opponent as well. But this is those blowouts have been leading to this. I hope and I expect to get two fantastic games on Friday. And it could be two blowouts. UConn and Texas, I think, are far and away the two best teams in the country right now. I would love to see them match up in the national championship. And we'll see how it ends up playing out. I don't have faith in South Carolina beating Tech and beating UConn again. We played them last year in the national championship, and they absolutely whooped our ass. And this team, despite not having Paige Beckers, is even better, which is even crazier. But you know what? South Carolina also has a fantastic team as well. If Agot McKeer is able to come off the bench and play like she's been playing, South Carolina has a shot. If Joyce Edwards continues to play the way that she's played all year, South Carolina has a shot. If Raven Johnson continues to have the best season of her career as she's done all season long, South Carolina has a shot. Also, shout out Raven Johnson. She is going to her fifth Final Four. She literally does not know what it's like to finish a season not in the Final Four. That is insane. I think a big X factor could be Medina Okot. She's been shut down the last couple of games. If she's able to get in the paint and actually score and be efficient, South Carolina has a shot. They have a shot. I don't see them beating UConn, but the thing is, the only thing that's kind of giving me hope is that UConn has not been at their best these last couple games, and if South Carolina is able to kind of get some jabs in, who knows? They like I said, they have a shot. And these are quite clearly the four best teams in the country, and they're going to be playing in a four-team tournament from now on. It's just down to four. These are the four teams that everyone wanted to see in the Final Four, and that's what we're getting. So I hope I think that it's going to be a heavyweight bout, and that's what I'm hoping for. And that the games actually deliver, and that they're good games and they're not blowouts. Unless it's South Carolina blowing out UConn, I wouldn't mind that. But that does it for this video. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for watching my South Carolina Gamecock women's basketball recaps all year long. Hopefully, the next one isn't the last one. Hopefully, we have 2 more and they're both celebratory. But if you like this video, make sure you hit the like button. Make sure you drop a comment down below and you tell me how much you like it. If you want to follow me on social media, you can follow me on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram at Kevin Bulkicki. Thank you so much. Have a great night, and we'll see you next time.